Okay, I have devices rolling, and the floor is yours.
Super, thank you. Good morning, Morro Bay. This is the Tourism Business Improvement District. My name is Steve Allen. I'm the chair. Today is Thursday, December 17th, 9:02 a.m. We're meeting via Zoom teleconference. This meeting is being recorded. I'd first like to establish a quorum. Amish Patel. Here. Joan Solu.
Here.
Terry Ennis.
Here.
Chris Kosteka. Here. There he is. All right. Nancy Dickerson.
Here.
Perfect. So, proud to report, it looks like we have everyone here. So we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Are there any public comments for items on the agenda? If you are a public caller, obviously you would be hearing me now, but you can log in and raise your hand, or there's a telephone number that you can call in and hit *9 to raise your hand. Do we have any callers?
Chair, at this time, I do not see any callers in the queue.
Okay, perfect. Do we need a motion to approve the consent agenda? Or do we just jump right into it?
There is no consent agenda today, I don't believe.
Thank you, Scott.
No.
Okay, so special meeting agenda item number 1, review the October 2020 TOT report and year-over-year report. Are you, Scott?
Yeah, I'm gonna share my screen here real quick. Okay. You see the numbers?
Yes. Yep.
All right. So we have 4 months of data for TOT and TBID collections. And as you can see, kind of comparing, the top chart is the current fiscal year, and the bottom chart is last fiscal year. Our numbers are exceeding last year, and in some cases doing exceedingly well compared to last year. Not what we expected when we established the budget for fiscal year 2021. I think we had a lot more visitors than we expected after the initial wave of fear and concern washed over in late May, and we saw an acceleration of visitation through the summer months and then into the early fall. Of course, now that the state is in a lockdown again, and talking with some of the hoteliers, occupancy rates are dipping down into near March and April levels. And we anticipated that when we established the budget for this year that there would be a second wave, just based on what epidemiologists were saying and based on previous pandemics, or at least modern pandemics. That's the trend. So we're in the midst of it again, so we expect that November numbers may sort of reflect that positive trend that we were seeing in TOT and TBID numbers, but that December, January, potentially even to February, those numbers will look more like pandemic numbers. And it's unclear at this time what the spring will look like. A lot of that depends on how we behave the next several weeks. Interestingly enough, in talking with the CAO of the county here, had a pretty interesting chart that showed our case counts over the course of the pandemic, and little peaks and little valleys here and there. And then we had Halloween, and then we had Thanksgiving, and the chart, they had to increase the size of the chart because the numbers were just going up at an exponential rate. So a lot of that has to do with not behavior we're seeing in our businesses so much as individual decisions being made to gather during holidays. And so very, very concerned about Christmas and New Year's and what that might look like for all of us. So that's just a word of caution about how that translates into TOT and TBID numbers. And then the STAR report, I'll have to downsize this a little bit. This is more of a update. It's late for the week of 11/29 through 12/5, and you can start to see the impacts of of the governor's order, and just, your typical slowdown during the winter months on the coastline. So I'm happy to entertain any questions or, help orchestrate a conversation. I'm sure there's a lot of information that folks want to share here, and happy to facilitate that and lead into our budget discussion.
But it's hard to see on the screen here, but year-over-year comparison, how did the T-bid do in terms of revenue?
Yeah, that's the next conversation, but I think I looked at it for those 4 months, and you're asking for T-bid or TOT?
T-bid.
Yeah, I'm looking at the numbers here, just eyeballing it. We're getting into the 400 plus thousand, whereas last year at this time, if you count this the first 4 months, it was more in the $300,000 range. So definitely a pretty nice increase over the previous year. Again, that's driven by folks getting cooped up and wanting to get out, travel being restricted in a lot of other areas, air travel restrictions / consumer behavior changes. Interestingly enough, our occupancy rates never really got back to normal, but our collections were up, and I think that has a lot to do with room rates and also a lot of increases we are seeing in vacation rental.
Scott, also the T-bid figure would be higher because we have vacation rentals in there.
That's correct. That's an excellent point, Joan. Thanks for that added point.
Any other comments or questions for Scott?
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
I can back that up, at least from what we're seeing. Occupancy's way down since Thanksgiving. I think people traveled up until that point. New numbers driving it up, but I think the travel is nearly non-existent from what we're seeing. I'm curious to see what December will look like.
Yeah, I think the last 7 days of December will really kind of show how it's going to go moving forward. I feel like normally in December it starts hitting the shoulder season, but the last 7 days are where people travel most, just as it's the holidays and coming around to New Year's. So I feel like more people will be traveling for a long-term stay, but short-term stays are going to be pretty non-existent.
Any other questions, comments for Scott?
When we look at the STAR report, it's just reporting on hotels. When we look at our overall TOT, or when you compare us to city, you have to compare the full TOT number, which includes vacation rentals and RV parks. For the past at least 15 years, we've worked with the finance directors with the city trying to get information from other municipalities only for hotels to break apart hotel TOT revenue from vacation rental TOT revenue from RV park revenue, so that we could have an actual apples to apples comparison. Interestingly enough, although Morro Bay is probably the smallest municipality, we have the most in-depth reporting on TOT. We're one of the only municipalities that breaks it apart like this and then has this board analyze it. At most T-bid meetings, they don't even look at the TOT revenue. And in Pismo Beach, they report it as a whole. So you can never, even though we know that they have about 2,400 hotel rooms over there, you can't figure out what the RevPAR is or the ADR. So you can't really do a comparison on how you're doing. And the STAR report is only a sampling of our Morro Bay hotels, and typically in other municipalities like San Luis Obispo or Paso Robles or Pismo Beach, they have larger hotels than us. Our median hotel size is about 23 rooms, and their hotels are much larger than ours, so they tend to report to STAR more than we do, so we can't get a real good apples to apples comparison, because even though we trend up, they also trend up, right? So we never have had luck with having a side by side. Now, Ms. Lichtig, our interim finance director, who Mr. Collins tapped, used to be over at San Luis Obispo, and she may have some way of understanding their budget a little bit better that would be able to show us how we can understand what the hotel room revenue is, so we can do an apples to apples comparison on our revenue to see how we're doing against our comp set. Tough to know any of this. It's really not important during COVID-19, but when we get outside of COVID-19 and we're trying to analyze, and the hotel group and vacation rental group is trying to analyze how their success will be measured, it's going to be more important than ever for that data to be able to be tapped. And I don't know if Ms. Lichtig would be willing to chat with one or more of us about what might be helpful, but I'd be willing to have that conversation. I mean, because I think that during COVID, it's really difficult to tell, but these numbers are going to be all over the place probably for the next 18 months. But once you get outside of that, you really need to be able to take a look at the data prior to that 18 months and post that 18 months and understand it really well and move forward with it. The other municipalities, I know they grab our TOT report off of our website, because they can analyze, they can do a deep dive into exactly what Morro Bay is doing to see if we're successful or not. And they do stand up their revenue against what we're doing, because we have the most in-depth reporting. There you go.
Great. Thank you, Joan. Let me just add, personally, what I've learned from a 30,000-foot view in 2020 that I didn't know in the beginning of the year is things in the hospitality industry with our properties, and they're all, beachside hotels, 3 in Morro Bay. Things are good until they're not, right? So like now with the stay-at-home order, honestly, we may as well shut down our properties. I think 2 of them have like 2 guests there. It just doesn't make any financial sense. But when things open up a little bit like they did in the summer, we see more people wanting to go to the coast. They want to go to the beach. We have outdoor activities and hiking, and they can be safely social distant. So with the vaccine that's probably going to come in fits and starts, I would guess next summer in Morro Bay is going to be pretty good. I don't think we're going to be out of COVID for a year or 2, most likely, but the beach destinations, seeing as we can get along with the residents, I think we have a really good shot at some good revenues here coming in the spring and summer. We just have to get through these times when the ICU bed capacity is low, like we are now, and that's a challenge. So any other comments before we move on?
So Steve, you said as long as we can get along with the residents, what do you think are the key things we need to do to bring the residents along with us?
Yeah, listen to their concerns. I mean, Scott can speak to that better than anyone. It's a different type of business model. People are eating outside. They're picking up orders to go. There's going to be more trash. We've got to pick up our trash. We've got to clean up after our guests. We have to, maintain social distancing and masks and everything that's recommended by the cities and the counties and the state. Scott, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, if I had the answer, I don't know if I'd be doing this job. It's like really hard to know, how people's behaviors and everything and worldviews are changing literally moment by moment based on what's going on with COVID and the national bungling of the handling of this sort of once in a lifetime disaster. So it trickles down to the state and local on how people feel about their elected officials and businesses and all the like. But jumping off that for a moment, I think trash, the tangible things definitely are the trash situation, the perception or fear of the sort of xenophobic thing that outsiders are going to bring the pandemic to them. However, the numbers simply don't bear that out. When we were at our highest visitation in the summer, our numbers were very low. We've seen a rise in COVID in the fall, and that's related to families and friends and others getting together inside. So part of that is maybe dispelling the myth that tourism is part of the problem. But you got to be careful because perceptions mean a lot to people, and they assume that there's more people in town that their risk factors increase. So a lot of this will be helped by data, and it's data we don't have our hands on, and our public health agencies are the ones that do, but they're strictly focused now on tracing the infections and dealing with the outbreaks in the prison and our congregate care facilities. They don't have time to look sort of to the future. So I think that might help to have better data, more conclusive data on that. And just being mindful, helping educate our visitors to be respectful. But again, I don't know how you do that. I wish I knew how. But those things that would help, I would assume.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions, comments before we move on?
I would say, just relating back to the trash thing, I think that some locals are concerned with the environmental impact of so much, going into the ocean, the seagulls carrying everything around. So yeah, that's definitely an important focus, that they are irritated with the amount of trash that could impact the ocean.
Thank you, Terry. So do we have a motion to approve as submitted?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Second, Amish, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, item number 2, Tourism Business Improvement District Fiscal Year Budget Update. Scott?
All right, let me get this so you guys can see you all have the, hopefully have it in front of you, but just in case you don't, here's the staff report. It's a short report, basically, not a whole lot to say other than, we established the budget was very conservative on the expense side, very conservative on the revenue side. Again, not knowing for sure what the summer was going to look like and expecting a second wave in the winter. We pegged our revenues to about $550,000. A typical year is closer to $1 million. On our expense side, we expected to spend about $350,000, and the remainder of the delta between revenues and expenses would go into the accumulation fund to be used when we can market again. In actuality, our expenses are looking more like they'll be around $150,000 to $200,000 for the year. So that means more excess revenue to go into the accumulation fund to be used when it's appropriate to market again. I know we had a conversation a couple months ago about reigniting our marketing efforts, and that was prior to the most recent surge, and it pretty much makes no sense to market right now for a number of reasons. So we expect that we'll just continue to bank revenue, put it in the accumulation fund to be used at the appropriate time. I did provide the attached budget report at the high level. So our total expenses to date, this would include all the way up through the end of November, is $65,000. That does not include the $40,000 contract with Civitas. So that brings us over $100,000, and then just sort of extrapolating out what the remainder year would be. Again, I think we're going to be at $150,000 to $200,000 expenses. And our revenues, as of the end of November, we're closer to $400,000. And remember, we budgeted for $550,000. So we expect we'll eclipse the $550,000 amount. Even if things are pretty dismal during the winter months, we expect there'll be some rebound probably in spring, which will more than likely carry us over that $550,000 amount. Here's sort of the high-level breakout of the expenses. Most of it was around Megan's time with us. She's no longer with us, but we're in the process of bringing somebody else on board. Helping with the wash stations, keeping our lifelines going, some of our social media, and a lot of it's around the website, contracts and phones, and some of the ancillary things that keeps our office running. But in reality, typically by this time each year, we would have spent about $300,000 or $400,000. We spent about, again, 65 plus the 40 for Civitas. So happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
Remind us the total amount for Civitas that was budgeted for the transition process was 50.
I think we are, what I expect is it's 40. The contract I signed is 40. Another expense may be the recruitment of an executive director. That we haven't made that decision yet. We certainly want the input from the board and city council on that. But the Civitas contract's going to probably be $40,000, maybe a little bit more if we need additional meetings or review of contracts. It may take that up a little bit more.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Scott?
Scott, have you started looking for someone to replace Megan or somebody to fill in interim while we move through the middle of winter and into spring?
Yes, we did an application process, and members of my staff interviewed several folks, and we're looking to move forward with one individual as soon as next week. So once we have all that dialed in, I'll make sure to share that information with the TBID board. It's a coordinator level position. Again, I think our expenses will probably track similarly to what Megan's costs were. Megan had a good pulse on what's going on with our hoteliers and vacation owners, and just sort of assessing the lay of the land with Visit SoCal in California tourism, and just trying to keep our website up to date and our social media feed up to date. Not encouraging people to be here, but to sort of keep Morbay top of mind so that we don't lose out on algorithms. But some of the other things we'd hope to do, like the search engine optimization and other marketing efforts that were paid, we're going to hold back for now. And we'll keep TBID, of course, informed. And if things start to move in a good direction, we can reassess initiating those again.
Thank you.
Mish, Terry, Chris, any questions? Nancy?
No questions.
I did have to come back on that. It's really hard to prognosticate, as we did last meeting, right? We're talking about ramping up the advertising, and here it's gone. So I guess we just have to stay extremely fluid, and when we feel it's time, then we make a plan that could change again at that time too. But it just seems too early to make any of those. But on the upside, always looking at the sunny side, if we can continue to bring revenues in and filling our funds, and then perhaps we get another huge bounce back at tourists when the time is right without needing to advertise, that we might be able to even prolong it to a while, until that euphoria of we can go back outside wears off, and then we're well positioned to advertise at that time. But again, too early, but there is a good side that we can build our war chest.
Yeah, that's good comments. Thank you, Chris. I would just advocate, it's a tough one, but, we don't want to advertise, but we also want to advertise for better guests, because when we will open up again, and if we get the surge like we did in summer, we we want to get the best possible guests coming to Morro Bay that we can, for the health and safety of our staff and for the citizens. It's a strange dynamic. I'm sure some of you have seen it, but when there are stay-at-home orders, there's a group of people, 50% of the population stays home. And then there's a group that really doesn't care, and those are the ones that go out there and are a little more, how do we say, just they're not wearing masks and they're a little more aggressive and dangerous. And I think that's what we don't want to attract to Morro Bay. So if there's some way we can spend some money on, wear a mask and social distance and bring that, better class of tourists, I would be in favor of that.
Good point.
I would agree, Steve, and maybe we could start promoting, look forward to visiting Morro Bay and fine dining and other things that we have to offer, yacht tours, that kind of stuff. So it's for the future, but trying to draw those people in.
Ironically, the New York Times has an article today. I don't know if you guys saw it in the Frugal Traveler column, talking about that there's a surge of people booking, but what they're looking for are cancellation policies. And it's a surge of booking because people know that travel will become extremely expensive as soon as people decide that they can get out. Then the price is going to go up. So frugal travelers are booking now, but what they want is they're not looking for cheap rates. They're actually looking for rates that aren't at rates that are right now before they rise, due to the kind of everybody wanting to get out of the house. But what they're looking for is cancellation policies.
I read that same article. I think they're saying that Airbnb and VRBO, I think those are the two that basically are saying, COVID is not a rationale for getting a refund.
Exactly.
Of course, individual Airbnb participants or hosts, if you will, can choose to honor it, but just as a platform in itself, it's saying, well, that's no excuse. You know better.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting.
But the county's still recommending a 24-hour cancellation policy, correct?
That's a good question. Did you read that off of this locale? That sounds like something they would say. That sounds about right.
Yeah.
See, the irony is that a lot of these things exist, but people don't know it. So some of it is just making it restating some of these refund policies, because I think a lot of people booking the travel just aren't aware of what exists.
On the note of the Airbnb and VRBO sites, I did have to advocate for my guests, a few of them that had cancellations back when we shut down before, to get refunds. They were not forthcoming, Airbnb, so I had to really push, and they had to push to get refunds. Even though my cancellation policy allowed it, they were discouraging it.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah, they're not the only ones. I mean, this happened across a lot of different travel segments. It's not just the lodging aspect of that segment. I mean, the Icon Pass did not refund anybody a single cent when skiing was shut down in February.
Wow.
Or January. So if you bought a $2,000 Icon Pass, what they did say was that they would give 15% off for your next year's pass, which, people are it's been in the LA Times. People are filing a class action lawsuit against them now. So it's they're pretty frustrated. And so it does, I think, bode well for an industry to be open and flexible as humanly possible, while also balancing the need to stay in business and pay those accounts payables as best as you can, especially the ones that are demanding full payment, and businesses who didn't get PPE. There are a lot of businesses. I walked through downtown last night, again at all the way down to the Rock and back, and through downtown, and I saw several hotels that were completely shut, FYI. Not a single light on at the hotel, just dark. And I saw several hotels with just one car, with lights on in the lobby, which indicated to me it was the manager's or the employee's vehicle. And I'm talking about our larger hotels. And so there were a couple of hotels that had 2, maybe 3 cars, but not many of them. So I do think that we're in for a second wave of very, very low revenues in December, but I've got my fingers crossed for the optimism of Amish Patel down there, who was saying that last week between Christmas and New Year's is going to get some revenue in and keep people from having to dissolve their businesses. So I'm with you, Amish. We've got our fingers crossed over here.
So we battled cancellation policy a little bit early on back in the spring. We have a plan now that I'll share just because I think it's fair for all and works well, is we're still advertising our standard cancellation policy because we want guests coming that believe they're going to come, not just fishing for maybe a deal. But then we're not holding them to it. We're letting all people cancel anytime, same day. The idea being that we're basically empty. So it's not costing us anything if they cancel, because it's the real cost on a cancellation is when you had the opportunity to book that room to somebody else and didn't, and then they cancel last minute and you end up with an empty room. So that's not in play right now. So we're keeping our cancellation policy so that when someone books now for June, if June's crazy busy, then we will hold them to the cancellation policy. So that's how we're doing it. We're not rewriting policies. We're just not enforcing our policies.
So hopefully the hotels and vacation rentals made some money in the summer, because it sounds like we're going to need it to get through the winter. Well, Scott, I think you and your staff did a fine job on this. You know, it's frugal, it's practical, and we're setting aside funds for the future. And I think the narrative is that, you know, spending the money with Civitas is going to improve the bid, hopefully, if it's approved, and, you know, put us in a better position for the future. So any other comments, questions on the proposed budget? I think we're just receiving this. We're not approving it.
Yeah, just receiving, yes.
Okay, do we have a motion to receive as presented?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Number 3, service plan for the Morro Bay Tourism Business Improvement District conversion.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Alan, so just to recap, over the summer, we formed a tourism stakeholder group of hoteliers, vacation rental owners, community members, restaurant owners, retailers, to sort of take stock of our efforts to date around marketing and looking into the future. COVID certainly has almost all downside. You know, we need to go into that, but there was some upside in that we were able to take pause on some of the things we're doing as a city and as a community. And this is one of those areas, and very thankful for all those who participated in that process, several of you on the board here, and led by a facilitator, Kathy Margrove, and a lot of really good ideas and discussion came out of that, you know, around 3 major areas. The first being sort of the duration of our mindset. You know, we're on an annual renewal process currently with TBID, which I think just on its own creates a sort of narrow viewpoint of our efforts and maybe limits our strategic vision. So that was a major area of discussion about how to change that, and that recommendation was to move from the 89 law that we operated under to the 94 law, which is a 5-year window to start. Difference there is that you have to go out and get at least 50% of the revenue generators to support it proactively versus the 89 law, which is a protest version. Again, that's important because you're setting a 5-year period and setting your budget for 5 years, your vision for 5 years. So those paying into that assessment want to know and want to be on board. And that's why that proactive positive vote is necessary. The other area which was discussed earlier today is the notion of kind of diversifying our visitorship. Is definitely on display this summer, as Chair Allen mentioned. A certain segment we saw more of than others. We want to have diversity. We're not saying we're shutting out people, but we want to see if our marketing efforts could attract a different visitor. And it has to correspond with improvement in the product, both what the city offers in our infrastructure and services, but also the private side and what they offer in amenities. And that all kind of wrapped around the TBID board itself, helping to drive our marketing efforts. And last but not least was the recommendation to transition from the city overseeing the efforts of on the day-to-day to a nonprofit board like we had in the past, which would have representation from the lodging industry, of course, and maybe a community member or two, depending upon how that shakes out. But ultimately, the hope there being that it's more reflective of the needs of the lodging industry, since they're the ones assessing and collecting, and maybe that makes more sense. And looking at how our performance compared now to the previous iteration, there is some data to support that. Long-winded way of saying that this board approved moving forward initially with this process, or at least recommended to council. Council took that up this summer, late summer, and said, yes, we agree. This could be a good move for TBID. Let's go through the process and see where we wind up. So we took that direction from council and onboarded Civitas to facilitate the conversion from the 89 to the 94 and from a city board to a nonprofit board. And Chair Allen and TBID member Solu and myself have been part of that subcommittee working with Civitas, who've put together a really good plan. They do this all over the state. I think they helped most recently with Visit SoCal, successful conversion to a 10-year TBID. So they plotted the timeline, and one of the first steps is the creation of a service plan. The service plan is part of the comprehensive management plan. That comprehensive management plan has a lot of the nuts and bolts of the legal side that there's a lot of minutia. It's all required. And of course, our attorney will review that to make sure we're in good standing. But the focus really is around the service plan. And I believe that's attached. It's like a 3 or 4 page document. But the key areas that are highlighted in that draft service plan, which we'd like your input on, is the budget that we proposed, which by and large wants to spend as much money on marketing as possible. The service district area, which would be the same as the existing TBID, which is the city of Morro Bay boundaries. There's a high-level review of the services to be provided, and they're very similar to the existing TBID services, again, mostly marketing. The assessment rate at 3% on overnight stays for hotel and vacation rental, and the 5-year term, which is different than the current 1-year term. So ultimately what we're seeking is your input on the service plan. This really constitutes the real kind of meat of the comprehensive management plan. This will be not required, but we intend to bring forward to council for review in early January. And then from there, we take that comprehensive plan out to the hoteliers and vacation rentals to get their review and support for it. And then it will come back to council for review and approval. And then we got to go through a series of public hearings to make that solidified. And then expectation is the conversion will occur formally on July 1st. The new TBID board will have been seated. The old one is extinguished. The funds move from the city to this nonprofit board. All the while, I'm assuming we would be doing recruitment leading up to July 1st, so the new person could start then. The accumulation fund will again be transferred to the new board, so you'll have that war chest that member Kosteka mentioned at their disposal. Some of the things to sort of sort out that are outside of the service plan are is the makeup of the board, but that will come early next year for discussion. So with that, I just wanted to turn it over to the board for discussion and see if there's a support for this service plan to move forward for council review early next year.
Thank you, Scott. So the draft service plan is the last 3 pages in your meeting packet. Hopefully you all had a chance to review it. Joan and I have gone through it in detail. Any board member have questions, comments on the draft?
The limited understanding of it, I like everything I see in there.
And one thing I wanted to note in the budget breakdown, we see admin services basically at 10% or $100,000. It's important to note that staff will obviously work in administration. That's sort of keeping the lights on, paying the bills, overseeing contracts, et cetera. But they're also going to be involved in sales, marketing, communication. So part of their salaries will also be allocated to the sales and marketing communication budget. Just want to make that clear. And that's how a lot of the other T-bids, and especially Visit SLOCAT, who we're modeling our approach on, does their budgeting.
Is it possible to allow in the budget some percentage or something for actual physical improvements? We've talked about how Pismo Beach did that.
Yes, that was a good discussion by the subcommittee. At this time, the recommendation is to not include those things. And part of the rationale is, I'm speaking against my own interests here, that's the city's responsibility to provide the services. That is the trash, restroom, sort of cleanliness. City is supposed to, through the community, establish a tax system of a reasonable and fair one that helps support the infrastructure. And we had Measure E passed by almost 59% of our community in November of 2020, which will bring us much needed funds to be able to backfill some of the key positions we had to cut during the pandemic for this budget, but and also restore our general fund reserves, and probably in the next couple of years be able to start a process to improve our infrastructure. So that what Pismo did was very specific to enhancements, not really maintenance. And they said, we want a couple more amenities, be able to close the loop on the Pismo Preserve project that's been very popular, as well as some of the things around their pier and Price Street improvements, because that's the main corridor for tourists. So they were able to increase their assessment by 1% to dedicate for 5 years all those funds to complete those projects, not for general services. And we've seen that some other T-bids do that, but it's pretty rare. Mostly they're focused on marketing. Other point of discussion with the committee is that our budget will be about $1 million. That's minor compared to some of the other competitors in the region, and we felt if we're splitting off more of those funds for physical improvements, that diminishes our ability to compete on the marketing side. So that helps explain some of the discussion, but very good question. That was a lengthy discussion amongst the three of us and the Civitas consultant.
Can I just, I'm going to back you up there, Scott. We had, Terry, a very, very long discussion on this. We beat this topic up. And one of the things that's interesting about Pismo is we keep talking about Pismo and this example, this model that they used for Price Street, the pier, and the Pismo Preserve. They're collecting 1%, but their 1% equals over $1 million a year, where we're collecting 3% from you, the vacation rental owners. I'm not included in this because I'm just a resident, and from you, the hoteliers. But that 3%, as you can see on this proposed budget, is barely at $1 million. So in order to have an apples to apples, we'd have to collect another 3% to do the kinds of projects that we're seeing occur in a place like Pismo. Whereas with the sales tax measure that just passed, 70% of moral-based, approximately 70% of moral-based sales tax revenue is paid by the visitor, by tourists. And so we had a good discussion about they're paying their fair share, right now to help with those beautification and infrastructure and improvement projects and the maintenance and helping us to maintain city staff. So we did have a very, very deep dive discussion on this, and actually said, let's see how the revenues increase. If this goes through, let's see how those revenues increase organically over the next 5 years. And as they do increase, when we come back in 5 years, if we've seen, which we hope to have the success, we hope the community has a great, phenomenal success. If we see this great, phenomenal success, then we can look at what percentage of that success do we take and invest in some type of program like that in the future.
Yeah, I totally understand where you're coming from. I don't think we'd have to do as high as 1%. It could be much, 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 much smaller. But just to even start having some money, I think that would help citizens if we were even doing small improvements, not trash and stuff, but I'm talking about, I don't know what I'm talking about per se, but maybe a nice common area, little park on the tiny park on the Embarcadero, something just so that the citizens can see how tourism is improving our community as well. I think that helps bode for them receiving them well too. So it just, it doesn't have to be this year, but it could be, like you said, in 5 years, but it just would be nice to see that at some point.
I appreciate what you're saying, and I understand that. You know, speaking as a hotelier for a moment, not necessarily a board member, we pay a lot in TOT tax, and Morro Bay is a small community. You know, relatively, we're assessing ourselves higher than the other areas just for marketing purposes. So we, you know, as Joan said, so we can compete. And personally, I think there's also, you know, if we're setting aside funds for improvement, I think that could easily get, you know, not necessarily abused, but if we do widen sidewalks in the Esplanade, you know, that's not going to benefit all the hotels equally. So I would recommend just using these funds for what they're intended for marketing. You know, the hotels are already paying a lot for TOT, and as Scott said, you know, those funds, there should be more funds in years to come for other things, improvements. Chris, Amish, do you have any comments?
I'm good.
I just want to underscore what I think Terry was saying is that this is more, I'd love to see in the Civitas plan a little bit more about the PR that TBID does towards residents. I think that's really what Steve, what Terry was saying is, and I think that is the gap or the weakness of the new plan of going to a nonprofit, which I highlighted sort of during the interviews, is that it widens a gap between the focus of the organization of hoteliers for hoteliers or accommodations for accommodations, and it focuses a lot more on tourism, which I think is great. And I think this is all really needed. I just want to make sure that the group doesn't become blinded to that the gap will widen between the focus and the point of view, mostly on heads and beds, and that we don't want to lose sight of the public relations between TBID and the residents.
Something said by Joan that struck me as higher than I thought is that 70% of our sales tax is paid by tourists. So it sounds to me like it's more an education. If the community was ever feeling a pushback of the marketing of TBID towards tourists, that's the general reminder that needs to be made. If we may have, I think we have 1,000 hotel rooms, and if we're completely full, that's 2,000 tourists in town. Well, there's 10,000 plus residents, and those 2,000 guests on the highest day, right, are paying 70% of the sales tax. In that scenario, the locals are getting a pretty good deal.
But the key here, Chris, is don't confuse logos, data, with the way people feel. The key here, and Steve very much understands this. I lived in Santa Cruz for years, and Santa Cruz is in such a typical and similar situation where San Jose pays most of Santa Cruz's taxes, but you still see bumper stickers all over town say "Valley, go home." People don't get it. Scott understands this, right? So don't, Kristen, you're absolutely right. Rationally, they should understand. They don't. They need to see something like a little park with brought to you by TBID. They need to see something that is meaningful to them, that really more speaks to their heart rather than their head.
Right.
No doubt this is an issue of PR, and it always has been for as long as the TBID has existed. It's been an issue of when there's a pot of money, and Scott can probably throw his hands in the air and tip back in his chair on this one. When there's a pot of money, like taxes or assessments, everybody has an idea of how it should best be spent in their own community. And there is no shortage of very involved folks in this community, and we are so grateful for that because they help us to recognize issues and get things done. And without them, we would really, really struggle. Additionally, that helps us to bring in put together wonderful organizations, terrific groups of volunteers. I mean, look at Morro Bay and Bloom. They have almost single-handedly managed that roundabout since it's been put in, and we are so grateful to them. Every time I drive through there, I think of the Morro Bay and Bloom group, and I'm like, wow, thank you so much, I mean, there you go. And, they recognized an issue, and they took it on. And it's really, with this, with the TBID, though, the law's focus is so narrow that even when you explain that law to folks that this money is there and it has to benefit those people that are assessed, they still don't want to hear that. They want to hear, and so it's about saying that in multiple different ways until you reach the core, reach the source, and everyone's on the same team. So it's 100% a public relations thing.
Yeah.
Like Terry and Nancy and everyone else here probably agrees and identifies. So yes, I am absolutely positive that whoever this group and the city taps to be the leader, the director of, if it goes through the newly formed MBT bid, that person will have to have a dynamic relationship with residents as well as with the hotels and vacation rental owners and the other businesses, because the restaurants want to know why we're not marketing them, right? So it's the same thing. So.
Thank you, John. Any other input on the draft plan?
Good job.
Yeah, good job, John and Steve.
Looks good. It looks really good.
Okay, thank you. It was a lot of work. Again, thanks Scott and staff as well. Doesn't look like we're approving anything. Scott, do you need anything further from the board regarding draft?
I think what we heard was maybe some inclusion of community involvement or something in the services. I don't think that needs to change the dynamic of the admin, ops, and sales, marketing, comms. I don't think we need to add, a service line, but I think we can say that that's part of the proposed service. Maybe just explicitly state that. What do you think, Joan and Steve?
Yeah, maybe under the sales, marketing, and communication, just a bubble, a blip that says community outreach.
Yeah, I can
community outreach and development or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the three of us can pull something. I just want to make sure there's concurrence with the full board on that.
Sounds good to me.
Sounds good.
Mish?
Sounds good.
Terry?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, great. That's all I needed.
And Scott, the impression I've gotten is this board evolves, if it evolves, there would be a community member as well as a representative from the city on the new board too, correct?
It's just a subject to discussion, I think, at a later time, early next year. So it's not that far from now. We would want to have that input probably from this board as well as obviously council, because they ultimately are the approvers of a new district. So I think it would be important to have input on what that board makeup is. Currently, the TBID has one community member, vacation rental, actually 2 community members and 1 vacation rental owner, and then the rest are hoteliers. It's a 7-member board. Perhaps 7 is the right number, perhaps more. And do we want advisory boards, and all those kind of things need to be discussed as we move forward. But
Yeah.
not today.
Right. I'm hoping that, as a subcommittee, we'll take a look at how everybody else does it. Like, for example, Visit SlowCal has a bunch of hoteliers on their board. Then they have a marketing group, and they have another group of folks. So, I mean, all that needs to be looked at and some suggestions made. We haven't even looked at that yet. So, we'll get there.
The nonprofit board formation effort begins in January. So I think, early next year, we'll be seeking input from this group and council, and the 3 of us will definitely kick around different ideas and see what makes sense. Again, the SoCal model makes sense it's a regional wide thing that you want to have a lot of inputs, but perhaps one board is sufficient, and it's just making sure the board makeup hits those key points of connectivity to the community, as Nancy said.
Okay, great. Thank you. Are we going to have a regular board meeting in January?
Heather, hopefully she's online. I think that's your regular schedule.
It would be the 21st, would be the 3rd Thursday of the month at 9 a.m. Zoom.
Does that work for everyone?
Good.
Okay. Yeah, that's our next meeting. So we may have some more information on this very question by then.
Okay, great. Thank you. Anything else do you want to go over before we adjourn? Board?
I just want to say Happy New Year to everyone.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Happy holidays.
Let's kick 2020 out and get 2020 in.
I hear that.
Yeah. Thank you all for your hard work for our community. And we have little gifts for each of you. I think some of you are able to pick them up. Heather will figure out how to get those to you.
And thank you
so much.
Thank you,
Scott. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
you, board. Happy holidays.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Meeting adjourned. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.